There's an actor who showed up to the Harry Potter set, filmed his scenes, and was cut so completely that you've never seen a single second of his footage. Not in any edition, not in the extras, not anywhere. And once you hear why, it makes a very specific kind of sense. Across 8 films, the Harry Potter franchise had to cut hundreds of characters, starting with Peeves. If you've only seen the films, Hogwarts is haunted by a handful of quiet, drifting ghosts. Nearly Headless Nick, the Bloody Baron, the Grey Lady. Mostly dignified, mostly harmless. What you never saw was Peeves. Peeves is a poltergeist, a non-corporeal spirit of chaos who has been living inside Hogwarts for centuries. He's not a ghost. He's something older and harder to classify. A being of pure disruption that even the Bloody Baron can barely control. He screams at students from around corners, drops water balloons on prefects, floods corridors for entertainment, writes rude things on chalkboards, and once helped the Weasley twins stage their legendary walkout from the school by attacking Umbridge on their behalf as a parting gift. He is in every single book. He's as embedded in Hogwarts as the moving staircases or the enchanted ceiling of the Great Hall. When Voldemort falls the first time, Peeves is singing about it in the corridors. When Dumbledore dies, the castle feels his absence partly because Peeves has gone quiet. And here's the part that feels almost surreal. Peeves was cast. Rick Mayall, one of the most beloved British comedians of his generation, known for The Young Ones and Bottom, was hired to play him. He showed up to the set of Philosopher's Stone. He filmed his scenes. Director Chris Columbus cut every single take. Not because Mayall was wrong for the role, but because every time he performed, the child actors around him completely lost it. They couldn't hold themselves together through a single take. Columbus tried multiple times and couldn't get a usable shot. The footage has never been released. Not in any director's cut. Not in any anniversary edition. Not in any format anywhere. Rick Mayall passed away in 2014, and those scenes, if they still exist, remain buried. The most chaotic character in the entire Harry Potter universe has no filmed legacy. In a way, that's very Peeves. Missing Peeves is just an inconvenience. What comes next is an entire rewrite. The films changed who the actual traitor was, and the person who ended up carrying the blame had nothing to do with it. Marietta Edgecombe. In Order of the Phoenix, the film tells you Cho Chang betrayed Dumbledore's army to Umbridge. It ends their relationship and frames Cho as, essentially, a traitor. In the books, Cho didn't do it. The actual betrayer was Marietta Edgecombe, Cho's best friend, who had joined the DA reluctantly, at Cho's urging. Her mother worked at the ministry, and when Umbridge's grip on Hogwarts tightened, Marietta cracked. She told Umbridge about the Room of Requirement. Hermione had placed a jinx on the sign-up sheet. The word sneak erupted across Marietta's face in bright, red, pulsating boils. The spots stayed for months. She was still covering her face at the end of the year, and Cho stayed loyal to her, even after everything. She defended Marietta to Harry, argued that Marietta had been scared, that her mother's job was on the line, that loyalty to a friend was complicated. Harry couldn't accept that. He saw it as an excuse. That's what actually ended them. Not a straight-up betrayal, but a genuine disagreement about where loyalty actually belongs. The books were telling a genuinely nuanced story. The film made Cho the villain and moved on. That's a character assassination. But the Goblet of Fire had an even bigger problem, because the person they cut wasn't just important to one storyline. His bad decisions echoed through the entire war. Ludo Bagman. If Goblet of Fire felt like it was missing someone, it was. Ludo Bagman was head of the Department of Magical Games and Sports. Former professional Quidditch beater for England. Loud, enthusiastic, instantly likable. He commentates the World Cup. He's one of the 5 official judges of the Triwizard Tournament. He's everywhere in that book. And underneath all the charm, he's an absolute disaster. Ludo has a serious gambling problem. He bet against the Weasley twins at the World Cup and lost. Then tried to pay them in leprechaun gold, which disappears by morning. Fred and George spent the rest of the book hounding him. He was also betting heavily on Harry to win the tournament, which is why he kept pulling Harry aside to offer hints. Not out of generosity, but because he desperately needed Harry to win and cover his debts with the goblins. And it gets worse. During the First Wizarding War, he'd unknowingly passed Ministry information to a Death Eater named Augustus Rookwood. Barty Crouch put him on trial. Ludo was almost certainly innocent. Just an idiot who got played. And his Quidditch fame got him cleared. The damage to his reputation stuck, though. By the end of Goblet of Fire, the goblins stripped him of everything. He fled, and his behavior toward the goblins, defaulting, conning, embarrassing them, is one of the reasons they refused to take sides in the Second Wizarding War. One man's gambling problem helped keep an entire magical species out of the conflict. The film gave his commentary roles to Cornelius Fudge. His entire arc evaporated. Bertha Jorkins. Most people have completely forgotten this character exists, and her absence creates a plot hole most film viewers never noticed. In the books, Goblet of Fire doesn't open with Voldemort sitting around vaguely scheming. He's already executing a specific plan, one built entirely on information extracted from a ministry employee named Bertha Jorkins, who happened to be in Albania when Wormtail tracked her down. From Bertha, Voldemort learned that there would be a Tri-Wizard tournament at Hogwarts. He learned that Barty Crouch Sr. was hiding a secret, his son, Barty Jr., alive and imprisoned at home. He got everything he needed to construct the plan that drives the entire book. Bertha is the first domino. The process of extracting those memories destroyed her mind and eventually killed her. The film skips her entirely. Voldemort's return plan appears fully formed from nowhere. Without Bertha, the whole thing just stops making sense. Bertha paid the price for knowing too much. The house elf subplot goes even further, because what got destroyed here wasn't just a life. It was the idea that loyalty is ever actually rewarded. Winky is the subplot the film's buried, and it's one of the darkest things Rowling ever wrote. Winky was a house elf belonging to Barty Crouch Sr. At the Quidditch World Cup, after the Death Eater attack, someone fires the dark mark using Harry's wand. Winky is found holding it. Crouch fires her on the spot, in public, without a second's hesitation. She didn't cast it. She was there guarding Barty Crouch Jr., who was hidden nearby under an invisibility cloak. He fired the mark. She took the blame to protect her master's secret, a secret she'd been ordered to keep. Crouch threw her away anyway. Winky ends up in the Hogwarts kitchens. She doesn't recover. She sits in the corner drinking butterbeer, which hits house elves far harder than it hits humans. Despondent, perpetually drunk, still insisting that Mr. Crouch is a good master, still defending the man who threw her away for doing exactly what he asked. Dobby tries to help her. She refuses. She doesn't want to be free. Her whole identity was built around a master who never saw her as a person, and without him, she has nothing to replace it with. It's an addiction arc in a children's fantasy series. No melodrama, no resolution, no rescue. Hermione's response to seeing Winky is what eventually pushed her to found Spew, which the films also barely acknowledge. Hokey. Hokey served Hepzibah Smith, a wealthy, vain old witch who had two things in her collection that young Tom Riddle wanted badly: Hufflepuff's cup and Slytherin's locket. In one of Dumbledore's memories, young Tom Riddle visits Hepzibah as part of his work at Borgin and Burke's. She shows him her treasures, things she barely showed anyone. He later poisons her, steals both objects, and modifies Hokey's memory so she believes she accidentally poisoned her own mistress. Hokey is convicted and imprisoned for a murder she didn't commit. It's the coldest demonstration of how Voldemort operates, using the most powerless person in the room as a scapegoat. Hokey's scene in Dumbledore's memories is cut from the film entirely. Winky and Hokey were both destroyed by men who saw them as tools. But before Voldemort was doing that to house elves, the same cruelty was being practiced on his own family. And what that family produced is the real origin story the films never told. The Gaunt family. Half-Blood Prince is really about one thing. How does someone end up like Voldemort? And the most important chapter in that answer runs through a family the film cuts almost entirely. The Gaunts. Marvolo, his son Morphin, and his daughter Merope. They were direct descendants of Salazar Slytherin. By Marvolo's time, centuries of inbreeding in the name of blood purity had reduced them to a violent, impoverished family in a rotting shack in Little Hangleton. Marvolo was abusive and loud about it. Morphin hexed Muggle neighbors for entertainment and communicated mostly in Parseltongue. Merope was the family's punching bag, overlooked, malnourished, suppressing her magic in a home where using it only ever brought punishment. Merope was in love with Tom Riddle Sr., the wealthy Muggle from the manor nearby. When Marvolo and Morphin were imprisoned, she finally had room to act. She used a love potion, almost certainly, to make him marry her. She became pregnant. Then she stopped giving him the potion. Maybe she thought he'd grown to love her. Maybe she was too exhausted to continue. Tom Riddle Sr. walked out the same day. He went back to Little Hangleton and never returned. Merope gave birth in a Muggle orphanage on New Year's Eve and died shortly after, apparently having given up on the will to live. She named her son Tom Morvolo Riddle. Lord Voldemort was not born from power. He came from a woman so completely broken by her family that she couldn't picture a future worth surviving. She didn't fight to live. She gave her son a name and gave up. The most blood-purity-obsessed Dark Lord in history was born from a line that inbreeding had nearly wiped out, and was conceived through a potion that removed consent entirely. The irony is total, and it's all gone from the film. The films include Dumbledore's memory sequences, but cut the Gaunt flashbacks. Without them, you lose the full weight of where Voldemort actually came from. The poverty, the violence, the tragedy of Merope, and what it means that the man who built an entire movement around blood purity came from a line that same ideology had already destroyed. Frank and Alice Longbottom. There's a scene in Order of the Phoenix that might be the most quietly devastating thing Rowling ever wrote. It's not in the film. Frank and Alice Longbottom were two of the best Aurors working, feared by Death Eaters, respected across the Order. After Voldemort's first fall, Bellatrix Lestrange and 3 others hunted them down. They tortured both of them with the Cruciatus Curse until their minds were permanently, irreversibly gone. Frank and Alice have been in the long-term ward at St. Mungo's ever since. Alive in body, but gone everywhere else. Neville visits them regularly. He's been doing it his whole life. In Order of the Phoenix, Harry and his friends run into Neville at St. Mungo's completely by accident. He's there with his grandmother, Augusta Longbottom, on a routine visit. Frank and Alice don't recognize people with any consistency. They drift. They're in a world nobody else can access. Alice sees Neville. She walks over to him. She presses a Drubel's Best blowing gum wrapper into his hand, the kind they give out as sweets at the hospital. She does this every time. She doesn't speak. She drifts back to her chair. Neville puts the wrapper in his pocket. His grandmother tells him to throw it away. He doesn't. He keeps every single wrapper she's ever given him. That detail, a boy keeping a gum wrap because it's the only thing his mother can still give him, tells you everything about Neville Longbottom. Why he fights. Why he stood in the Great Hall at the end and defied Voldemort, even when it looked hopeless. Why Bellatrix is not just an enemy to him, but a personal debt. The films reduced all of this to a few lines of backstory. The most important scene in his entire arc doesn't exist on screen. Frank and Alice were destroyed because of who they were. Amelia Bones was destroyed because of what she refused to become. And her death was the Ministry's first sign that no one was untouchable. Amelia Bones. Amelia Bones ran the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. She was one of the most respected people in the entire Ministry, and genuinely one of the few who deserved to be. In Order of the Phoenix, she chairs Harry's disciplinary hearing, and her fairness is immediately striking. She listens, pushes back when Fudge tries to steamroll the verdict, and makes it clear she's not interested in political convenience. Harry gets a fair hearing in a room that was built to bury him, and that's almost entirely down to her. She's murdered off-page between books 5 and 6, killed personally by Voldemort, which tells you something about how seriously he took her. The Order mentions it as a sign of how drastically things are escalating. Her death carries real weight in the books. The film barely registers who she was, which makes her death in the narrative mean almost nothing. Rufus Scrimgeour. Rufus Scrimgeour is technically in the films. Bill Nye plays him for about 5 minutes in Deathly Hallows. In the books, Scrimgeour is a completely different beast. In the books, Scrimgeour spends most of Half-Blood Prince and the beginning of Deathly Hallows trying to recruit Harry as a propaganda symbol. He wants Harry's image, wants him to be seen supporting the Ministry so the public believes things are under control. He approaches Harry at Christmas, pressures him through intermediaries, and eventually confronts him directly. Harry refuses every single time. The defining exchange is when Harry tells Scrimgeour plainly that he sees the Ministry's failures for what they are, that Scrimgeour is trying to use him, and he won't be used. Scrimgeour doesn't collapse or get angry. He looks Harry in the eye and says, "I see you are Dumbledore's man through and through." Harry says, "Yeah, I am." That's it. Scene over. It's one of the sharpest moments in the series. Two people who completely disagree, and one of them ends up respecting the other more for it, because he won't back down or pretend. It's not in the film. When Voldemort's forces take the Ministry, Scrimgeour is killed rather than give up Harry's location. He doesn't break under torture. He doesn't give them a single thing. The films don't give him nearly enough screen time for that death to land the way it should. Professor Binns. In the books, history of magic is taught by Professor Cuthbert Binns. He's a ghost, but not because he died dramatically. Binns fell asleep in the staff room one evening. He stood up the next morning to go to his class. He left his body behind. He didn't notice. He's been teaching the same way ever since, droning through goblin rebellions and ancient legislation, delivered by a man who died mid-routine and genuinely never clocked it. His students spend most of History of Magic asleep or doodling. He never appears in the films. History of Magic barely exists as a subject on screen. He's a small omission by the standards of this list, but Binns is a perfect example of what the books had that the films didn't. A world dense enough that even the throwaway details are brilliant. A man who just left his body in a chair one day and carried on regardless. That's a joke that takes 11 years to deliver, and it lands every time. Binns is the funny one. What the Caros did when they ran Hogwarts is not funny in any way. Alecto and Amicus Caro. The Caros show up in the films, but what they actually did at Hogwarts in the books is significantly darker than anything on screen. Alecto took over Muggle studies, rebranded as a class about why Muggles are inferior beings who steal their magic from real witches and wizards. Amicus ran dark arts. Not defense against the dark arts, just dark arts. He used real dark magic in lessons and had students practice the Cruciatus Curse on other students as punishment. The films skip most of this. In the books, it's laid out plainly. Hogwarts, under Death Eater control, wasn't a tense background situation. It was a deliberate, sustained program of cruelty run by two people who enjoyed it. The Caros weren't a footnote. They were the mechanism. Andromeda and Ted Tonks. Most people know Bellatrix. Some know Narcissa. Almost nobody in the film-only audience knows the third Black Sister. Andromeda married Ted Tonks, a Muggle-born wizard. Her pureblood family burned her name off the family tapestry and disowned her completely. What she built after that was a life defined by the exact opposite of everything they stood for. She raised Nymphadora Tonks, opened her home to the Order as a safe house, and helped transport Harry when Privet Drive was no longer safe. Ted was a marked man under Umbridge's Muggle-born Registration Commission, the Ministry's program that accused Muggleborns of having stolen their magic from real witches and wizards. He refused to go in and face their interrogators. He ran. He was caught by snatchers and killed. By the end of the war, Andromeda had lost her husband, her daughter, Nymphadora Tonks, and her son-in-law, Remus Lupin, all three killed within days of each other. She was left with her infant grandson, Teddy Lupin, no surviving family, and a tapestry with a scorched hole where her name used to be. She raised Teddy anyway. She just kept going. The films barely acknowledged she existed, but she might be one of the bravest people in the entire series. Not because she fought, but because of everything she survived and still got out of bed for. And if this has you wanting to go further, we've got a video on every wizarding school in Harry Potter explained in detail. Because the wizarding world goes a lot further than Hogwarts, and most of it is just as wild as everything you've just heard.